Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh was a popular leader, celebrated for his move to nationalize Iran's oil industry, which threatened the profits of Western oil companies. In response, the CIA orchestrated Operation Ajax, a coup to overthrow Mossadegh and secure control of Iran's oil. Working with British intelligence, the CIA funded protests, manipulated media, and bribed military officers. As a result, Mossadegh was removed, and the pro-Western Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was restored to power, a move that would foster anti-American sentiment in Iran for decades. Using techniques similar to Operation Mockingbird, the CIA created pro-American narratives across Middle Eastern media outlets. In Cairo, Beirut, and Baghdad, agents ensured that stories favored Western interests, especially on the topics of communism and socialism, which the U.S. saw as threats to stability. One target was Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and Voice of America broadcasts, which were tailored to promote anti-communist perspectives. These media outlets shaped Arab public opinion, highlighting Western nations as stabilizers while portraying local resistance movements as dangerous. While the Shah's rule created temporary stability for Western interests, the oppressive tactics fueled resentment, contributing to the Iranian Revolution of 1979. The backlash was severe. Anti-American sentiment exploded, culminating in the hostage crisis at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. In 1958, civil unrest erupted in Lebanon, with some factions siding with the pro-Soviet Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser. Fearing a communist takeover, the U.S. deployed troops to Lebanon under Operation Hard Surface to support the pro-Western government. CIA operatives, embedded within the American embassy, conducted psychological operations, influencing Lebanese media to amplify fears of communism. These efforts swayed public opinion toward the government, helping maintain Lebanon's alignment with the West, but deepened divisions that would lead to civil war. The CIA saw the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan as an opportunity to weaken the USSR. Under Operation Cyclone, the CIA funneled billions of dollars to arm and train the Afghan Mujahideen, supporting their resistance against Soviet forces. Working with Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, the CIA equipped fighters with weapons and training camps, some of which later spawned groups like the Taliban. While the operation contributed to the USSR's eventual collapse, it also left a legacy of violence and instability in Afghanistan. In the 1960s, fearing communist influence in Iraq, the CIA supported the rise of the Ba'ath Party, which included Saddam Hussein. The agency provided intelligence and even names of suspected communists for the Ba'athist purges that followed their ascent to power. CIA support helped solidify the Ba'ath Party's rule in Iraq. However, this decision set the stage for Saddam's eventual dictatorship and the conflicts that would arise, casting a long shadow over U.S.-Iraq relations for decades. The democratically elected President Jacobo Arbenz sought to implement land reforms that would redistribute unused land owned by powerful corporations, like the United Fruit Company, to landless farmers. The company, with close ties to U.S. officials, convinced the American government that Arbenz's policies were a sign of communist infiltration in Latin America. The CIA launched Operation PBS Success, a coup that used psychological warfare, propaganda, and a small rebel army to oust Arbenz. The agency spread false narratives through radio broadcasts and newspapers, making it appear that a major anti-communist uprising was underway, which led to the collapse of Arbenz's government. In the 1970s and 1980s, Operation Condor was a U.S.-backed campaign of political repression and state terror carried out by right-wing dictatorships in South America. The CIA, along with other U.S. agencies, provided intelligence, training, and financial support to regimes in Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, and Paraguay. The operation aimed to eliminate leftist opposition, with tactics ranging from assassinations and disappearances to torture. The CIA played a crucial role in coordinating information among the dictatorships, enabling cross-border operations to silence dissidents, even abroad. Journalists and media outlets were pressured to present favorable narratives that masked the brutality of these regimes. The first democratically elected Marxist president, Salvador Allende, became a major concern for the United States. The CIA, under orders from President Richard Nixon, was deeply involved in destabilizing Allende's government. Operations included funding opposition media to spread disinformation and economic sabotage to create unrest. The CIA financed newspapers like El Mercurio, which ran stories blaming Allende for economic turmoil and chaos, creating public pressure against him. On September 11, 1973, General Augusto Pinochet led a military coup that overthrew Allende, who died during the siege of the presidential palace. Pinochet's brutal dictatorship followed, but the narrative in U.S.-influenced media framed the coup as necessary to prevent a communist takeover. When President João Goulart pushed for economic reforms that angered Brazil's elite and foreign investors, the CIA worked to facilitate a coup. Through clandestine funding, the CIA supported Brazilian media outlets that portrayed Goulart as a communist sympathizer, destabilizing the country. The agency also spread fabricated stories of Soviet influence in Brazil, generating public fear. The coup in 1964 led to a 21-year-long military dictatorship, which the CIA assisted with intelligence and training in anti-communist methods, often involving torture and censorship. The narrative in both Brazilian and American media highlighted the stabilization brought by the military. The U.S. opposed the Sandinista government that overthrew the Somoza dictatorship in 1979. The CIA covertly funded and trained the Contras, a rebel group fighting against the Sandinistas. Alongside military aid, the CIA engaged in propaganda campaigns, both in Nicaragua and abroad, to depict the Sandinistas as authoritarian and Soviet-backed. CIA operatives planted false stories in local media and paid journalists to write articles critical of the Sandinistas. In the U.S., media coverage was carefully crafted to emphasize the threat of a communist Nicaragua destabilizing Central America. The narrative drove public support for continued covert funding, despite human rights abuses by the Contras. The CIA supported Argentina's military junta during the Dirty War, 1976 to 1983, during which thousands of suspected leftists and activists were kidnapped, tortured, and killed. The agency provided intelligence that helped the military track and silence dissidents, and it worked to ensure that the U.S. media did not overly criticize the junta's human rights abuses. CIA influence extended to local press outlets, shaping stories that justified the junta's national reorganization process as a necessary measure against communist insurgency. Victims were often labeled as terrorists, hiding the true extent of state violence from the public.